welcome to Groundwork Foundations. Today, we're discussing the mental health effects of migration, both voluntary and involuntary.
We'll explore how immigration impacts individuals and families over generations, particularly the effects of forced displacement due to historical traumas like the Transatlantic and Arabic slave trades.
And migration isn't just a physical journey, it's an emotional and psychological experience that it can carry, deep-rooted challenges and strengths.
Yeah. Um, I remember the stories that both my parents have told me about what it was like to come here, to first be here, um, like not feeling like they really spoke the language well enough, always being aware of the accent that they have, even if their English is actually quite good, quite better than um, others who English is actually their first language and they might not know any other language.
That's strange to me because and I guess it's because I speak the language that's here, but I always actually get excited when I hear people's accents. And I always have to find the politically correct way to say, I'm sorry, but where are you from? Because then that always leads into them telling me something fabulous about their culture. And, I love it. So I wish that that wasn't the case for many.
Yeah, there's just like a lot of insecurity that people whose first language is not English bring when they come to an primarily English speaking country. That sometimes people make a big deal out of accents, and depending on how heavy it is, whether they can understand it because they might not be used to people who have that sort of accent. But me growing up with them, it was very easy to understand them. It didn't feel like an accent at all. It's just the way that they talk. And it's normal.
I think that's with all parents. My dad used to say things to me when I was a kid, and my friends never knew what he was saying. They'd be like, "What did your dad say?" Oh, he told me to go clean my room. And they're like, "Really? That's what he said?" I'm like, in my mind, I heard it clearly and it made sense. So I get it. It, if you grow
Yeah.
up with you're familiar with it. But so, have you or your ancestors migrated? And how has that shaped your identity and your mental health?
Immigrating to a new country is a huge decision, one that's often filled with hope, excitement, and the promise of a better future. But even when immigration is voluntary, it comes with unique mental health challenges. In this segment, we'll explore why people choose to migrate, the emotional hurdles they face, and ways to navigate these challenges while preserving their well-being. So people migrate for many reasons. Some seek better economic opportunities, better education, or to escape violence or war. Others move in pursuit of a safer, more stable future for themselves and their families. While these motivations are powerful, the process of adapting to a new country brings mental health challenges that can be difficult to navigate. One of the most common struggles is called acculturative stress. That is the pressure to balance one's home culture with the norms of a new society. Many immigrants feel pulled between staying true to their roots and assimilating to fit in. Sometimes an immigrant might feel eager to lean heavily on one or the other, or try to balance the two. Language barriers can also create a deep sense of isolation. When communication is difficult, it can lead to self-doubt, frustration, and even withdrawal from social interactions. Many immigrants worry that they won't be understood or that they'll be judged for their accent or fluency level. Sometimes that those fears are confirmed by others in society that can judge, and sometimes those fears can be overblown or exaggerated. So, and then, which leads to another major challenge, discrimination and xenophobia. Facing prejudice can lead to heightened anxiety, hypervigilance, and depressive symptoms. The constant awareness of being othered can take a significant emotional toll, especially when it's happening over and over, right? And then there's family separation and role strain. Many immigrants leave loved ones behind or take on new responsibilities to support family members financially. This can shift traditional family dynamics and add pressure to adjust to new roles while dealing with feelings of guilt or loss.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Um, so let's look at the community support networks. Community support, it actually plays a crucial role in helping immigrants, navigate the challenges of adjusting to a new country, providing a protective buffer against discrimination, isolation, and cultural stressors. Um, it also, the networks provide strong social connections, and that's been shown to significantly reduce the risk of stress, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and behavioral difficulties, especially in children of immigrant families. Then there's the resilience being built through access to support systems, and that assists with overcoming language barriers, discrimination, and cultural adaptations. We have community networks, which often provide essential resources for housing, employment, healthcare, and legal assistance, which can be very beneficial for immigrants. And then connecting with individuals who, share similar cultural backgrounds that can foster a sense of belonging and it can reduce isolation. And then your religious and cultural centers, such as mosques, churches, temples, they serve as safe spaces for community connection. And the online diaspora communities also help individuals reconnect with aspects of their culture that may have been lost or suppressed through, societal expectations. So, some examples of mutual aid groups that I found were the Global Refuge, which is for refugee resettlement and advocacy. And then we have the Catholic Charities, which helps with immigrant support services. The American Immigration Law Foundation, and they provide legal assistance and advocacy. And then there's your grassroots mutual aid networks, which they're in immigrant neighborhoods and they help families start businesses. They offer financial aid during crises, such as if someone was to be hurt on the job or killed on the job. And then they also assist with funeral expenses. But those, like I said, are found in your particular immigrant neighborhoods.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, Another potential coping strategy and or protective factor could be seeking help. And some of us actually end up in therapy. Um, or we practice other forms of self-care. Traditional therapy models can fail to address cultural grief, racial trauma, and historical displacement. The common barriers to effective mental health treatment for us include differing understandings of mental health and illness, mistrust of medical institutions due to historical harm, lack of culturally competent therapists who understand racial trauma, and dismissive attitudes towards spiritual and holistic healing practices. Culturally affirming therapy prioritizes language, tradition, and spiritual healing, meeting us where we are without judgment. Therapists who specialize in racial trauma, intergenerational PTSD, and migration stress play an indispensable role. Holistic approaches such as meditation, spiritual rituals, storytelling, and body-centered therapies offer alternative paths to healing. And research from the National Alliance on Mental Health suggests that therapy is the most effective when it respects and incorporates cultural identity.
Mhm. Very true. And so, many immigrants and descendants of enslaved people experience cultural disconnection, language loss, and identity crises. And these challenges often stem from, forced assimilation and generational trauma. For centuries, enslaved and displaced communities preserved their histories through oral storytelling, spiritual rituals, and music, which were expressions that conveyed both their struggle and their resilience, the emotions, their achievements, those kinds of things. And today, descendants can reclaim and strengthen their cultural identities through language reclamation, which could be learning, indigenous or African dialects. It can be, when you do your genealogy and ancestry research, which is basically tracing your familial roots. It can also be looking at the different languages that are a part of your genetic makeup, and that will help you facilitate visiting those places. Cultural festivals and heritage programs that celebrate the traditions. So, an example of resilience is the Gullah Geechee community in the Carolinas, and they've preserved African traditions for generations, despite, forced displacement. Their language, their cuisine, their spiritual practices, all of that remains a living testament to cultural survival. So let's look at the concepts of involuntary migration and the generational effects of forced displacement. Um, when you look at transatlantic and Arabic slave trades, between 10 to 12 million Africans were forcibly taken through the transatlantic slave trade, with millions more through the Arabic slave trade. And families were separated, languages were erased, and entire cultures systematically dismantled. Um, it's a little tough to process uh, when you think about your ancestors and what they, went through, and here we are now. So, but the psychological and generational scars that are left behind can include PTSD, chronic stress, and generational trauma, which persists amongst the descendants. Epigenetics research suggests that trauma can be passed down biologically through DNA. And, studies indicate that the psychological impact of historical trauma can increase vulnerability to anxiety, PTSD, diabetes, obesity in the subsequent generations. Forced religious and cultural assimilation has also created lasting identity struggles that, continue to impact descendants today. Um, an example is the Haitian voodoo tradition which survived despite enslavement, and it was allowing displaced Africans to retain their spiritual identity and reclaim cultural agency. So there's a quote from Dr. Joy DeGruy from Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and it says slavery didn't just take people's freedom, it stole their sense of self, their culture, and their right to define their own identity.
Hmm.
Um, this is a lot in that quote.
Wow.
Colonialism and displacement. So when you look at land theft and forced assimilation, indigenous African and Middle Eastern communities were displaced from their ancestral lands due to colonial rule and greed. Boarding schools, forced religious conversions, and name changes were used to erase cultural identity. I do know a lot of the people that I've worked with in Houston. Um, they have an American name or a Christian name, but they also still acknowledge their cultural name from where they were from or their family's heritage.
Hmm.
Um, so then, identity struggles and mental health impacts include internalized depression. For many individuals, they feel disconnected from their history and they experience cultural shame. The higher rates of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and they're prevalent among indigenous and displaced communities. An example is the Indian residential schools in Canada and the US forcibly removed indigenous children from their families, banning their language and their traditions in an effort to erase their cultural identity. Um, Another quote says that colonization left an imprint on our DNA, one that carries both the wounds and the resilience of our ancestors. And that was from an Indigenous activist. So I think that this is a good place for us to pause as we will be featuring a guest speaker in part two of mental health effects for immigrants, voluntary and involuntary migration. And our guest, which I'm excited about, will discuss his current research and work with the slavevoyages.org database and aid us in navigating the loss of identity while offering insight into how descendants of forced migration and race and how they can reclaim their history. I'm stumbling over my words tonight. In part two, we'll continue discussing, generational trauma and its long-term effects, systemic and institutional barriers affecting displaced communities, and the healing process. What does recovery actually look like, and how do we get there? So, if you found this discussion valuable, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us to continue bringing these conversations to light. So, we'll see you in the next episode.
See you then.